Okay, so now I'd like to introduce Rollie. Anyway, Rollie's going to talk to us. I twisted her arm. She was the most unlikely looking undercover CIA agent in the Middle East I've ever seen. So she's going to talk to us about some of her exploits over there.
Thanks for that great introduction, Dan. Appreciate it. It's great to be here. I'm going to romp through this. I gave this talk about 3 weeks ago at Columbia to a class up there taught by a former colleague. And they took 2 hours. So I'm mostly asking questions. So it's going to be really a quick version. First of all, I'll start with a little story. And this happened actually about 10 years ago when my daughter was a senior at Fordham University. And I was up visiting her and we were having dinner and she said, "Oh, Mom, you would have been so proud. Last night I was just like you." And I sort of paused and thought, oh, geez, what does that mean? Well, she had been working late in the art laboratory. She was an art major. And she had her backpack in there and a notebook that had all her notes for a test she was taking the next morning. And so when she finished working in the art lab, she left. It's about 9:30 at night. She's the only one in there. The door locks behind her and she realized she's forgotten her notebook. So she apparently tried to call security, couldn't get through to anybody, and she ran out of time. So she took out her student ID, kind of went over to the lock and jiggled it and got in and got her notebook, closed the door, left. And she said, "Yeah, Mama, just like you." I'm like, oh, golly, what did I do? Well, then I paused and I said, "No, honey, if that had been me, I would have been miles and miles away from that, maybe in another continent, and my fingerprints would have been nowhere near that." No U.S. hand, no Rollie Flynn there. So anyway, what I'm going to talk about this morning in very brief is what I was 30 years at the CIA. I'm now the president of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, which has offices right across the street. I have to point that out. It's a nonpartisan think tank. And what does that mean? It means we do research and public events on international affairs and national security. So I encourage everyone to check us out. Almost all of it's free. Anyway, I was in the part of the CIA that does undercover operations. I was undercover for 23 years, and I served overseas in Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, sort of long-term in those places, but I also did assignments all over the world. And so anyway, I want to start with sort of a primer. What is intelligence? So think about what is intelligence. It's different from regular information. It's information. And as I'm talking, I want you to think about how this applies to what you do, because I think you'll find that, oh yeah, I kind of know that. I just haven't thought about it. And I also hasten to say that, that I'm not encouraging corporate espionage. So, but knowing the lay of the land is very important. So intelligence, what's intelligence? Think about that. We don't have time to get everybody's answers, but intelligence is information. It's information, but it basically has 3 qualities to it. For instance, if I know on September 12th that hijackers are going to fly, September 12th, 2001, that hijackers are going to fly planes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Is that intelligence? It's information. It's not intelligence. I have to know it the day before, don't I? Or I need to know it months before for it to be intelligence. So intelligence has to be secret, that you don't know. Also has to be timely. Again, if I know it after it happens, or even seconds before it happens, sometimes I can't do anything. The other thing is, okay, Mrs. Jones had Cheerios for breakfast this morning. She lives in one of these high rises over here. It's information. It's timely, but does anybody care? No. So it has to be 3 things. It has to be secret, has to be timely, and it has to fill an information need. You have to need to know it. That's what intelligence is. And so the CIA basically does three things. It collects intelligence. That's the part of the business I was in. Basically recruiting people to tell us secrets that are of interest to the US government before, again, they're secret, they're timely. CIA also does analysis. I was not in that side of the business, although I was a chief of station overseas in a couple places. And the chief of station actually does do a little bit of analysis on occasion for policymakers. And they also do covert action. Well, we'd need a week to talk about covert action, so I won't get into that. So, you know, that to me is one of the most interesting things that the CIA does. And that's covert action is always done with a finding signed by the President of the United States and briefed to Congress, only a few people in Congress, and cleared through the Department of Justice. But basically, it's something between diplomacy and military action to further a policy goal of the United States. But it's done, and that's why the CIA is the only place in government that's authorized to do covert action. It's done without showing the US hand or that you have plausible deniability. So anyway, I won't talk too much about that, but I will romp through and talk about what I think to me is the part of the business I know best, which is recruiting spies to work for the United States of America. And sometimes they don't realize they're working for the United States of America. So I'm going to flip through some of these slides. We already talked about all that. And we need intelligence, again, all these reasons for planning so that we make good decisions, so that generally when administration comes into office, those people sitting around the table at the NSC are experts. However, a lot of them are political appointees. And so you need a permanent intelligence capability so that when surprises happen, you can bring in an expert. And I always use the example. Anybody remember what kicked off the Arab Spring? It was exactly. And it was a vendor who was upset and he self-immolated. And there's probably nobody sitting in the principals at the NSC, the National Security Council, who know that much about Tunis. And they may know a lot about tennis, but not Tunis. So that's where you need an expert to come in. And it's usually from the CIA or the military, who probably speak the type of Arabic that's spoken in Tunisia and can analyze and interpret and help our policymakers make sound decisions. And again, avoid tactical and strategic surprise. Again, think of 9/11. We were surprised by that. So I'm going to talk about the recruitment process. And there's several stages when we think about recruiting a spy to work clandestinely for us. And again, report intelligence. Now we all know what intelligence is. So think about what's a really difficult intelligence issue that we might want to know about right now. Putin, what Putin's going to do. What's up with Iranians? Yeah, anybody else? China, what's China going to do? What's Xi Jinping thinking? Yeah. Absolutely. Benjamin Netanyahu, what's going to happen with that government? What are they going to do? How long are that coalition going to last? And what are the implications for the neighborhood? What are those other people around Israel thinking? How is Iran going to react? Syria, some of our closest allies, Jordan, what are they thinking right now? Yeah, that's all intelligence. Nobody said it, North Korea. North Korea has missiles that we can tell go high enough that if they point them this way, they can hit the United States of America. So I'm going to stick with North Korea because I think it's probably the absolute hardest one of the hardest anyway, places for us to get inside and find out what's going on. Why is that? Can I walk into North Korea? Closed society. We have no diplomatic relations. So if I want to get inside North Korea, let's say find out what's happening in a particular nuclear facility, or try to get inside Kim Jong-un's head and figure out what he's going to do, I can't do it alone. So I got to recruit somebody. So we do this target analysis and we figure out, we use all the sources of intelligence. That's SIGINT intercepts. We use our agents. We call them agents. CIA is different from FBI. I'm not an agent. I'm an officer. To us, an agent is a source. So I'll try to say source. We use our sources on the ground or who travel in and out. Travelers are an important part in a place like North Korea. Who travels in and out? Are there Koreans who travel in and out? Are there business people? Maybe a South Asian businessman who's selling things related to the nuclear plants in North Korea. So anyway, we do this target analysis to try to find out, is there somebody who potentially has access to either the plant or to someone in the plant? Sometimes you have to daisy chain it out a little ways, find somebody who knows somebody who goes in, who knows somebody who, and figure out how to get to that. We also work closely with foreign partners around the world. Everybody's read about the Five Eyes, the US, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, who are our closest intelligence allies. And as well as intelligence services have relationships all around the world, even with people you'd be surprised. We probably have a very minimal relationship, even with the SVR, that's the service now in Russia that replaced the KGB, and the FSB, which is like our FBI in Russia, because there are interests that transcend bad diplomatic relations. And there are issues like organized crime, counter narcotics, where even we and the Russians care about the same stuff. So we use a lot of foreign partners to help us identify, because there are a lot of places, for instance, in North Korea who do have diplomatic relationships, who can travel inside and probably have sources inside. So we might go to that too. So that target analysis, really important. Oh, I'm using the wrong thing. Microphone won't turn those slides. So then we do, let's say we find someone. So we will do a discrete investigation of someone. And let's say, I'm thinking probably the likeliest, easiest might be a South Asian business person who's somehow involved in the supply chain and might even have blueprints or access to them. So we try to recruit someone like that to begin with. So we do an investigation, find out everything we can. We would probably ask for traces from all our federal partners and foreign partners as well, to see if anybody knows this person, partners we trust, and find out, is this someone who might be amenable to recruitment? There are a lot of people who do business with North Korea who don't necessarily like the North Koreans, I'll put it that way, or are concerned about their behavior. So we'd want to know that. And these are the classic motivations. This is very simplistic. I think the FBI came up with this MICE acronym. It's money, classic motivator for spies. It's rarely just money, though. It's usually a mix of all these things. Ideology. Ideology was a great motivator during the Cold War. I suspect it's a great motivator right now for Russians to volunteer as well, given what's going on, particularly those who are outside of the country. But ideology, ideology is it's usually a mix of things. One of the books I will absolutely recommend is The $1 Billion Spy. It's about Adolf Tolkachev, who was ultimately caught and executed, but he was a Soviet Navy avionics expert. And the reason he was called the $1 Billion Spy is that he gave us $1 billion, saved us $1 billion, our US Navy. And And he cooperated. He never came out of the Soviet Union, and he cooperated with us. He volunteered, and he gave hundreds and hundreds of documents to us. And he did it because he hated the Soviet Union, absolutely hated the Soviet Union, because his mother-in-law had been in the Gulag, and he felt that they had killed her. And so it was revenge is also a huge motivator. It doesn't go up on there. He also wanted money, though, too. So there was a little bit of money involved there. Coercion, this is blackmail. This is the Russians. This is their specialty. And there's a story I heard. Anybody remember Ferdinand Marcos? His son's now the president of excuse me, I think it's his grandson. Anyway, longtime dictator of the Philippines. And there's a story I heard that when he was visiting Moscow many years ago, he's in the presidential suite of their nicest hotel, which at that time probably wasn't all that nice. And as he's retiring for the night, he hears a knock on the door. He opens the door, and there is a delightful 23-year-old Svetlana coming in to, come visit him. So he lets her in, and they have a lovely evening. And the next morning, she's long gone, but his advisors are in the presidential suite with him. And again, there's a knock at the door, and these sort of goons are there at the front door, and they say, "Can we speak with you alone, Mr. President?" So he excuses his advisors. He invites these fellows in, and they sit around his coffee table, and they throw down a manila envelope, open it, and array all these big photographs of, Marcos and Svetlana. And he's a little shocked, and he looks at him and he says, "I'll take 3 of those and 5 of those, 6 of those." Now, the point is, you can only be blackmailed if you can be blackmailed. So coercion doesn't always work, and it sometimes backfires. Ego is huge. A lot of the folks who spy feel that they've been passed over. Aldrich Ames, who was the big spy at the CIA, was caught in 1994. He had sort of all the classic problems, but he was legacy. His dad had been an analyst at the agency, and he was kind of a terminal GS-14 and never really got promoted. He had a lot of problems. He had drinking problems. He was going through a divorce, and he married a new wife from Colombia, and she had expensive tastes. So his motivation was all mixed up with money. He needed money. There was a revenge because he felt that he hadn't been treated nice enough. He thought the ego, he thought he was smarter. In fact, I have a friend who is a psychologist at the agency, and she wrote a couple articles that are unclassified. She wrote one right after Ames had been caught. She wrote it more recently, and the articles basically say, one's the update of the other. Why do people spy? And she included in the updated one, why do they leak? So I think this is relevant to all of you in terms of insider threat. When people always talk about cybersecurity and getting a tool to fix cybersecurity, cybersecurity is usually about human beings. And you want to have systems in place to make sure, A, you hire the right people in the first place, but also, that they continue to be motivated and they're not, sabotaging you or, stealing your stuff. But I will say one factoid: almost all spies don't come into organizations in the government with the intention of spying. They become spies along the way. And so, as I mentioned, this friend of mine wrote this article. You can actually Google it. Her name is Ursula Wilder. It's on the internet. She says there are 3 factors for why people spy. One, they have an underlying personality that's usually narcissistic. They have feelings of grandiosity, and sometimes they're psychopaths. They feel no guilt about what they do. And when their ego or their paycheck doesn't match what they aspire to, they're troubled by that. So that's the first factor, this underlying personality. The second is usually there's a precipitating crisis. Often it's a trouble at work, money problems, marital problems, and it can be substance abuse. Aldrich James was an alcoholic, falling down drunk alcoholic. And so the final one is opportunity, though. You have to have the opportunity to spy. If I want to walk into the Russian embassy here, either the mission in New York or the embassy in Washington, the FBI is all over that. Any CIA officer knows you're going to be filmed. Well, Aldrich Ames was working with the Russians as part of his job. He met with the Russians. He was trying to recruit the Russians, but they did the opposite. They recruited him. So again, these motivations, revenge is huge. And the classic spy is mid-career. It's that 40 years old midlife crisis. The dream hasn't worked out. That's the classic. It's changed a little, and I think technology's been the game changer. If you go on the WikiLeaks website, they actually have a page on it that says, put this email address into your Tor browser to send us information. Tor is a browser that will take you to the dark web, so that everything you send is encrypted and you can hide it. So if I go on the Washington Post, they have a page that says to send us tips. So it's very easy to volunteer these days because I think of technology. So in Aldrich Ames days, it was a little harder. So these are the classic motivations. So let's say I'm a case officer and I finally find this Pakistani businessman who does work with North Korea. So I go into the next stage, which is what we call the development assessment stage, where in a classic operation, I spend some time with this person, get to know this person, get to know what makes this person tick. And so there's a reason I send this picture, because it is a little bit, it's a courtship. And trust is really, really important. With Russians, I always say, you never recruit a Russian. You give them an opportunity to volunteer because they trust you. A lot of Russians really hate the system, but they're not stupid. Their lives are there and they're not going to ruin their lives. But there are some who are waiting to volunteer. One who I thought really interesting was Adolf. No, what am I thinking? I'm drawing a blank on his name. He's a general, a GRU general who volunteered. He was assigned to the Russian mission in New York, Polyakov, Dmitry Polyakov, GRU, which is the military intelligence general assigned to the Soviet mission in New York. And while he was there, he had his family with him, and his son became ill, and he asked for permission to take his son to an American doctor, and he was refused permission. And again, they're very careful. They don't want you seeing, they don't. Intelligence services are very careful, particularly about letting their people see others. So he did not take his son to an American doctor, and his son ended up dying. And he never got over it. And the FBI recruited him and actually recruited him. He was taking a ship across the Atlantic, and they put an FBI officer on that ship and recruited him. And his motivation was hatred and revenge. So you want to listen for what are this person's motivations. I'll ask a question here before you actually pitch the question in the courtship mode. How many of you proposed to your spouse? How many in this room made a proposal to their spouse? Okay. Did you know the answer to the question before you asked it? Same thing. We want to make sure we know the answer before we ask the question. So that's what this period is all about. You're kind of edging them toward it. You're finding out what their motivations are, whether they're reliable. And this is one of the conundrums, is that a person with vulnerabilities is more likely to spy. They're also more likely to be a bad spy because, like Aldous James was drunk all the time. You don't want someone who's drunk all the time, but I'm sure the Russians made the calculation that what he was giving them was so valuable that they had to deal with this guy. And you want someone who's reliable, somebody who's discreet and doesn't, tell people what they're doing. So this period is where you're looking for all that stuff. And so the pitch recruitment, Steve Strasberg, sorry, I lived in Washington a long time. So the pitch. So before you get to the pitch, you ideally want to know what the answer is going to be. Now, there are some exceptions to this, and that's what we call the cold pitch. And that's where the target is so valuable that you're willing to pitch them sight unseen. You don't know each other. An example of that would be a North Korean, because they don't come out very often. When they do, you might know that they're in a hotel. Maybe they're going to the UN in New York, or maybe they're in a foreign capital and the local service tells you there's a North Korean. He's in this hotel room and he's going to be there tonight. We're watching him. We'll tell you when he's there. So one of us might go knock on the door with a suitcase full of money. And, I wouldn't be surprised if, they would pay someone with the right access $1 million. And so what are the downsides of this? With a North Korean, not much. The biggest downside when you cold pitch someone is they're going to report it. They're going to expose who you are. And you're going to ruin your bilateral relationship. For instance, if I were to, let's say, go pitch a French national, and that person reports me, we've got a really important bilateral relationship with the French. I just don't, that wouldn't happen. But North Korea, what's our bilateral relationship with the North Koreans? It's pretty lousy. There's no great relationship to ruin. So the other thing, if he reports it and we tell him, look, we're going to pay you $1 million if you cooperate. As far as I'm concerned, that's marketing, because they're going to be people that find out and say, oh, those Americans are paying well, so there's really no downside there. So termination ultimately comes, and it doesn't mean termination in a bad way. In fact, CIA officers always strive for amicable termination because we don't want that person to go away unhappy and expose who we are and how we operate and what we do and what we're interested in. And so we want this to end in a good way. So we're usually very good to people who have served the CIA. And sometimes it's a sloppy tradecraft. Maybe the guy's such a drunk. I remember I was in Africa one time and I handling a guy. He was so drunk coming to meetings. I used to pick him up in my car that a couple of times he couldn't find the door. So, it's all supposed to be this very swift operation where you go by around a corner, he jumps in, but it's like, I have to get out and help him in, yeah. Sometimes, yeah. If you can't, if it's in Beijing or, Moscow, that's pretty tough. So it is a lot easier if you can meet with them. Let me just see how I'm almost out of time. Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna end with a story because did I mention false flag operations? That pitch, often we will, if you're trying to pitch a Russian, not all of them want to work with Americans. Some of them want to. I pitched a Russian once and I brought in a big suitcase of cash. It was a cold pitch. And basically I told him I'm the CIA station chief here. Is they don't want to deal with that low person. They want to see the boss. But sometimes, particularly terrorists, I had a terrorist operation and I posed as a white African. Because there are a lot in Southern Africa, think South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi. There are a lot of whites who were born and raised, and I'd spent time down there, so I could pass. He was a member of a terrorist organization. He never knew I was an American. So sometimes we do use false flags. And I'll tell a story, quick story. And if I've told anyone this story, don't give away the ending, because I want you to think about how I think about this, which is I was in Africa at one point, and I was coming back from a meeting with one of my sources, and he'd given me documents. They're very, very well concealed. I won't tell you how, but they were concealed. And as I was going through a market area, not traveling very fast, it was early evening, but it was dark. All of a sudden, it's like, boom, a little girl about 5 years old ran into the side of my car, flipped up on the windshield, hit the windshield, and she was unconscious, bleeding from the head on my windshield. So I stopped. So the question is, what should I do? I have this split second. And within that split second, a crowd was already starting to gather. And a couple of the locals took this young girl to the side of the road. But the question is, should I stop or should I move on? So these sort of ethical dilemmas, if I should stop and help, but if they find these documents or they decide to come after me, that's not good. If I move on, I'm kind of the ugly American, not helping, this young girl. So how many people think I should stop? Okay. I'm in Africa. I'm not going to tell you where, and not a great place. How fast is the car? Okay. So I just asked how many think I should, how many think I should drive away? Well, that's one of the issues. Is it a setup? Or are they gonna torch my car? Are they gonna kill me? Are they gonna find the documents or burn the documents before they find it? But I'm also have an obligation to protect this individual who has given me, because the documents will show who he is if they're found. And so anyway, so who thinks I stopped? How many people think I drove away? I stopped. And I have to say, I didn't think about it much. It was just like, oh my God. But I suppose it was a split second assessment of the crowd. And she was actually, the two guys at the side, we put her in my car and we drove to the local hospital, because not everybody at this point had cars. And so we got her there, and the doctors looked at her, and she was actually fine. She was just bruised up, and she was conscious by the time we got to the hospital. And then afterwards, I went and saw her family and brought them a little envelope with some money and a present for her, and it all went away. Yes. I told my boss, the chief of station, the next day, who was this gruff guy who was not really happy to have a young woman working for him. He just said, I said, they're here. Don't worry, sir. They're here. So anyway, I think I've run out of time. Have I? I've run out of time. Sorry. Back to you. Thank you.
I was waiting for her to say that she wasn't going to tell us. We had to come back next week to find out. Huh? All right, everybody, have a great day. Don't forget to sign the chit. Don't forget to sign up for the various events I mentioned, especially the expo. And we'll see you next week.